Hi, this is a guy and today we are doing the last of a three-part video on Chill of Ravenloft, the latest expansion to DDO. And in this one, I'm gonna talk about the wilderness and a summary of what I feel about this expansion pack. It's gonna get real. Well, I'm not gonna try to take too long. I know the one with the different quests took a little bit long, but it's so hard to truncate the single quest. And there is, after all, 13 of them, so it can take a while. Now, you're looking at the wilderness map. Of course, not everything is revealed because honestly, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to every single nook and cranny. But I'm going to talk largely about what you can expect from this wilderness. A wilderness that is relatively small in regards to most of the different expansions, pretty self contained, and as you can see, fairly mundane. It's a city core, it's very bland. It just feels a little bit boring in the sense that you have snow, brick buildings. The soundscape is pretty good. It's Victorian era, like Frankensteinish, a gothic type um, music, and that's fine. It suits the what they're trying to achieve here. But it's still largely a waterfront, as you can see, and a self-contained city area surrounded by mountains and walls, and that is pretty much it. There are also three purple encounters, and those are, I wouldn't say indoors, but those are in its own different areas. So you have the Ettin here down below by the waterfront. You have two caves, one for the frost giant and one for the Hydra. And then, of course, you have a smattering of rare encounters that you can find all over the place, like at the top of the riverbed, etc. And of course, you have the different quests. So on the waterfront, you're going to find boats that you can row over to islands and areas that are outside this particular map. And then in the center of the area, you have some quests. And of course, in external areas, you have the mines, cave type quest, or the temple quest. And then finally, if you look at this, there's also the public area, which is one building that you pretty much start nearby when you go through the first quest, and that's where you operate out of. And there's also a museum. Now, the museum itself, I think, is going to be where the raid is. I'm not entirely sure. But as far as I can tell, there has not been a case, and I walk in there pretty much any time I go into the wilderness, where it opens up for, say, a rare encounter as far as I can tell. Now, if you look at the furthest in, there is a door, and that door seems to be pointing towards one of the quests. So I'm not sure if from that quest you can actually get into this area. I don't know. There is also something similar in the cave with a Hydra that is in there. You can see that there's a doorway somewhere. It's high up that points to, again, one of the quests. So I don't know if the raids are going to be linked somehow to these two areas. I don't know. And of course, as I mentioned in the quest itself, the last quest, there is this entity that just bum rushes through a wall that, as far as I can tell, is not showing up anywhere else. And I did go back and looked into different levels, and I couldn't really find it. So I don't know if that's a prep to be the raid itself, and if the museum is the start point of that raid. No idea. That's just me speculating. But it would be interesting. I probably should check out comments if they have started releasing anything about the raid that's upcoming, and maybe we can get an idea of how that works. Maybe I should have checked that out before I did this one. But irrelevant, regardless of that particular setup, this is the cityscape. And as you will see from the different photos and the videos that I'm going to show off the area, it is pretty plain. Now, there are a couple of cool places that I'm going to illustrate that I noticed. So I'm a fan of exploration. If you have ever checked out any of the other expansions, there are certain things where you can go and explore. That goes all the way back to the original kind of Chavaret invasion, where you had the green steel raid, right? That whole area is several different biomes, essentially, of different incursions and different like existing areas. And there are many nooks and crannies that you can go and explore there. It's an excellent wilderness, even though if it is not as nice looking as some of the other expansions later on. Now, truly, that one is not necessarily an expansion. That's just a quest pack with a raid. But the expansions that we see afterwards builds on that to some extent, such as Menace of the Underdark with 4 excellent wilderness, and then Shadowfell 2 wilderness, kind of plainy. But if you look at the cityscape in that one, it's pretty explored. You can explore and find cool things. If it wasn't for the purple mist that destroys the entire area, it would be pretty cool to explore, right? And nothing wrong when you go out in the wilderness and then you have the lower area, its own biome, like a northern forest, right, with tall trees and streams and all that. And then as you go up, you have elevation going all the way up to where you have snow smoke just, it's flying off the mountain edges, and it looks gorgeous, even though it just doesn't feel very fantasy. And then you have things like Feywild, that is a decent looking wilderness with a lot of things to explore, and also the kind of brightness that you imagine a fantasy area would be. And then you have an excellent Isle of Dread, which very Jurassic from the soundscape to everything else. It is wonderful to explore. Now, I did mention that museum. So pretty much behind where you have your the public area, up here along the main road on, let's say, the west side of the map. Is that what it is? There is a note that says that this is a museum. And as you can see, there is a couple of rooms that you can look around, but I have never found a switch or anything. But at the top of the minimap, you see that there is some kind of door notified, like it's an entry or an exit from one of the quests, or just something you're going to be able to enter at some point during the raid. I just don't know. There is also a door across here, but there's no way that I've seen that you can open it. And it's true every time when I go in here. There are also a number of red named in this area. They're not going to be randomized. They're just either there or not, just like the standard has been from the very beginning of DDO. There was a time frame when they had those random ones that you can do, but now when you have the materials in the chest, like you see here, I don't think they do the random stuff anymore. You'll also notice that there's certain elevation in the city itself. Like you have these fire escapes, you can call it, where you will run into some encounters. But also at the very top, you can find things like ingredients, like backpacks and whatnot. I haven't seen that there are any specific red names that you come across at the very top. Maybe there are. But there is one area that had a really cool thing that I discovered, and I'll show you that. Here is just one way of maybe jumping over to other flat roofs. So if you like that kind of elevation exploration, that exists, which is cool for city. Like in this case, you have that backpack. But that's pretty much it as far as I can tell and have discovered. There's also this camp that you'll find. In fact, interacting with any of them at any point that I've been out here, don't seem to do anything. You can certainly talk to them, but Yeah, I don't really know the purpose of it. If that's is some kind of encounter, if it's just simply to add s- some flavor to it, it's hard to tell. But here we have the river area, and down below here by the boat, there can be a red named. So you have that. Then it's just a frozen river all the way down across the broken bridge, and then all the way out into the harbor itself. And then, of course, we actually have one of the purple encounters. That's going to be in the cave right here. And that is the frost giant itself. Now, the frost giant itself is a boring encounter. I would assume it gets a little bit easier if you have like cold absorb and cold resist type items, obviously. You will find that that's mostly what the giant does. It is almost impossible to avoid taking damage, and that's because it will just spam one cold spell after another. Now, the big round um, thing that he does, you can avoid that if you just move it out into the flat areas. It seems to have a pretty long leash on it, so as far as I can tell, if you go to this particular area, which is closer to the entrance, you have a little bit more room to maneuver, and there's less risk that you get stuck trying to fight through the pillars and all that. And then you can avoid, of course, those big round things more easily. But as far as all the other spells, it's just one spam after another. This one was really boring. You're looking at roughly about 2 million hit points, and all you do is this. It was even more dreadful when I did it on my Vanguard, which is a pretty decent melee. Um, Almost 100% double proc chance on a weapon. Good, decent amount of removing magic, like magic resistance and physical resistance. But because these large encounters tend to like kick you back a lot, knock you back, you can't really stand it in combat, melee combat a lot. And even if you drop down one of those healing zones that you get from one of the destinies, it just doesn't really do anything. I ran out of hit points just standing there, or not hit points, but I ran out of spell points, the pool that I had on my Vanguard, just trying to stay in combat and beating up on it. Whereas if I do it on my Warlock here, just pivoting around, taking a hit, and yeah, it really wasn't that fun. I'm not saying that any of the other encounters of this purple have been all that fun, to be honest. Look, if you're looking at the hit point pool of any of these purples and the counters themselves, they are not interesting. It is the way for you to get that special material that only these encounters, like the purple encounters, provide. And that's fine. And with Isle of Dread, you actually also had a chance for a blank weapon. You don't have that here. It just doesn't work that way in this particular setup. But there's just something about these encounters that feels boring to me. And I think the reason is very simply is that the amount of hit points these encounters are getting is not comparable by the amount of power that you get by increasing the level. You know what I mean? It's not that you cannot handle it. Obviously, I could, and obviously my Vanguard can. Even though the Vanguard as a melee is falling behind again, because the tactical feats that I use, it's a tactical fighting half tank type, is not as useful in this because of the increase in levels compared to just pure, I wouldn't say violence, but that's how it is. And here we have another rare encounter. That's going to be closer to the Wish, I believe. It's kind of in between the Wish and a minor encounter. Is that what it's called? And again, material. So I appreciate those. Since Isle Dread, when they started including material into these rear encounters, just far, far better. Even though in sometimes you could have found a named item, I like the fact that any exploration that I really want to get into in the wilderness is actually rewarding. And here, of course, you have a statue that will give you your dark gift. That is just by where you have the wish, which is the quest where, you can get you talk to the dark god, so to speak, or see how it played out with the memories. And then here at the top of the ridge, and that is behind the wall that you see, the fragment on the wall, there could also be an encounter. So in this case, it's some kind of owl bear, I believe. And again, every single one of these chests will provide you with a reward. Now, there is one red named encounter that you are going to come across in the wilderness, and that is the duelist. That one is worthless because it doesn't give anything. It's just a red name that runs around in mobs, and it just has a bunch of hit points, hit harder, and it's just boring. I don't get the idea of adding red names like that. Just because you can't crowd control them, I guess. But that really adds nothing to the overall feel of the wilderness. I feel that red names should be the reward for seeking them out. Just adding red named in the wilderness that provide nothing is just silly. And of course, the final one that you will encounter is going to be. Now, before I show you the Hydra and the Ettin battle, I wanted to show you again what I was talking about, this red named that's just out here, the duelists. Just has a lot of hit points, as you can see, and it just doesn't provide anything. It's not an encounter to do anything for you. Okay, so let's check out the Ettin. The Ettin is just raw physical damage. And even though I have roughly about 1,400 something hit points on this guy, which is low compared to some of the other players that I see out there that really maximized their its points, that guy can hit you and take you out with one hit. And I do believe this fight will show that, or maybe not. But there was one or two fights where I got a little bit too close and he knocked my socks off. And that's fine. I don't really have anything against like insta stuff, especially when you're talking about the large encounter like that. And that happened also with the T-Rex that would just chew you apart very easily. And then it was a little bit slower with, if you go to Island Dread and look at the green dragon. It's a green dragon, right? Where it was just the compounding effect of its breath and all that acid and poison stuff. That really did it. So being pummeled by something as large as that, with that meat club and that axe, yeah, that happens. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a boring encounter in the sense that it will not be affected by anything but raw DPS. And that's fine, right? But it's like 200 million hit points, which makes these encounter dreadful. Luckily, of course, the material itself is bound to account. So whether you do it on your best guy and then give the reward to one of your alts, that's fine. But none of my alts could really do much to this guy. The Vanguard, as I mentioned, that was a dreadful. It just goes into, and he could take the punches and whatnot, but it's just me constantly healing, being knocked back, and it was boring. On my Warlock, and I would assume it's the same with anyone that has a nuker spellcaster type, they will have a much easier way of doing this encounter because, again, it's just running around in a circle and pew-pewing until it's done. It might be like a barbarian type build out there that can deal a lot easier with these kind of type encounter because of the high DPS. But running different classes like my Artificier or the Vanguard is just not fun encounters at all. And again, here we have another duelist that does nothing except for just, hit points. So let's talk about the Hydra. The Hydra is probably the most difficult encounter of these, and that's because of the relentless amount of acid damage and the dots that you take. It is a stack and acid dot, and unlike with, for example, if you go down the well in the Menace of the Underdark in the Evening Star, you have this giant green dragon that can dot poison damage on you. Poison damage you can get rid of with a poison potion or an anti-poison potion, or I do believe a heal even. In this case, you don't have that choice. So the first encounter I did, I actually died it was a party wipe of my hirelings and everything. And then I went back before the time expired in the wilderness, and I defeated what was left. This time I thought a little bit, well, I'm going to be a little bit smarter here, right? So I put one of my healers, the main healer, on just stand by flag. And then I pull the Hydra itself towards me. That way he doesn't go and engage into close combat with a Hydra, because what happens then is that he gets slammed down and then killed really easily. It's always better to have someone just standing like that, because his little plinky is not going to do anything. The main job you want someone like that is to heal. The second part is also, I did more or less, I think, ignore those Hydra's head being smacked off, and they will then go and attack your hirelings and potentially healing hirelings. So the first thing I did here was just I focused on getting those down. So when the Hydra head gets knocked off, then I will go after it right away. And I try to then drag the party away from my main healer, which I was dumb enough not to just double back here. But then again, I really try to avoid getting splashed constantly, because that acid damage builds up pretty quick. Now my guy can self-heal a little bit, but it is, of course, very important that your hirelings also, top off whenever they can. And in this case, that acid is brutal. I would assume that if you have an acid absorb item, and if you have a decent amount of resist, it really isn't the worst of encounters. I like the purple worm in Mythdraenor, which is just a dreadful dumb encounter. And I mean a dreadful dumb encounter because all it does is just go under the ground where you can't really do much to it, and then pops up and chew you. You literally have to stand still in order to get it to pop up. Otherwise, it would just go underground and just trace you and follow you. And that is the dumbest encounter that I had so far. It's just broken in the sense that you can't even utilize your own DPS to do anything. You seriously just have to wait until it pops up. I eventually ended up doing that one with a party as opposed to alone, because that encounter was seriously flawed. But here, at least, you have a chance if you have the right materials and you plan and play ahead a little bit. So it's not a dreadful encounter per se, other than the fact that it has a lot of hit points, and you have to be aware that there's going to be a decent amount of acid splash damage as part of it. And if you have competent enough healing, you should be fine. But is it a fun encounter? I like the mechanics of the heads being, knocked off and then goes after you. And if you don't think about it, then you're going to have to deal with that. That's not bad per se. Unlike, of course, the spamming Frost Giant that just spams cold spell after cold spell that can barely miss you. And the same thing with Ettin that's just chasing you around with a big club and smacking you in the face. There is some mechanic here that's a little bit more interesting. Now, there was one area that I discovered that I think that was a cool thing. So just by the entrance to one of the quests, that's one where you go um, beneath and encounters those grave diggers. If you go up on one of these fire escapes in a nearby building to it, and I think I just wanted to showcase in this case the actual elevation. I notice that there is a graveyard with a red named right there. So you see that gate right there with a sign for the quest? That is actually the quest. If you click on that door from this side, then you go into the quest. And if you jump over here, you get into the wilderness area that have one of the red names. And I thought that was pretty neat. I don't think I have found any other wilderness example like that. Not really, as far as I can think of. And I think I played most of the content. But that was kind of cool. It was cool to be able an encounter like that because there's a little bit of a secret that you don't realize until you would have done something like that. And the fact that you would then jump up on a fire escape like that, that is not something I think most player would necessarily do. Unlike they do like me, just doing it for the kicks and giggles. So yeah, I thought it was neat. And then if you click on the actual door here, all it does is just transition you to the other side of the wilderness. And there's really nothing else here that I know of. And I just walked around. But this is actually the courtyard that you get into in the beginning of the quest before you go down and below to under the city for the rest of the encounter. And that, my friend, or friends, is pretty neat. I mean, yeah. So Deadman's Crossing right there. And then you have just an encounter on the opposite side that you would normally not see and know of unless you're like me, just stumble up on that fire escape. So let's summarize this expansion. It's an okay expansion for one reason. And I know this is going to sound a little bit silly, but it is for the itemization scheme, but not for necessarily the items themselves. I haven't seen the raid loot, so maybe that will be the difference. There aren't that many blanks. It's not like Slaver's blanks or even Isle of Dread blanks. There's a lot of items that don't really fit any of my guys right now when I truly look through them. And that's unfortunate because that's what DDO is about nowadays. That the power of increasing, and you don't necessarily do it for the love of questing, right? I know that sounds wrong, but a lot of it has to do with the items too and the item scheme. And the item scheme is right in the fact that it's the best crafting system that we have. The Isle of Dread now translated into Lamordia. And then, of course, you have the component of Myth Draenor set bonuses type scheme. All of that is fantastic. But as of now, the items don't really fit my guys as far as I look. There are a couple of things that I could think of maybe removing. I even checked my Vanguard, my Artificer. It's possible that I have some other alt that would be perfect for those items because I don't really have looked into other items. So all that is possible. The wilderness is drab. It's not really that fun of a wilderness. I think it's good that it's small-ish in that you can traverse it pretty quickly. It's not as exciting as Isle of Dread, and it's certainly not Menace of the Underdark, vast and cool. I'm glad that they went down to slightly smaller in comparison to Myth Draenor, which was unfortunately a waste of space, to be honest. And as far as the quests are fine. There's I think a blend of quests that are not so fun, like the Wish. And then you have the ones where beneath the city, where you can explore little nook and crannies on the inside, which feels very Sharn-like, which is not bad at all. Overall, those 13 quests are generally not that long. There are a couple of ones that takes a little bit longer to do, but most of them feels like you're not traversing the same terrain over and over. If you go to Mists of Ravenloft, when you went to that castle, that was just dreadful going up and down and doing this and finding the clues and yada yada yada. It didn't feel like fun. First time exploring it, cool. The rest of the time you're grinding for items, right? And when you're grinding for items, the last thing you want is a quest that's dreadful that way. These ones are I think short to medium plus, so it's not super long ones. Most of them can be done in 15 to 20 minutes if you have a decently powerful character. And the reward is always there in that they have added those extra chests behind walls and also some of the red named encounters, and every single chest have materials in them. There is a reason for you to explore, and the quests are laid out in such a way that exploring is not like going wildly outside the normal areas. That is not worth it. After all, the worst thing you can do is do a convoluted type quest, such as with Mr. Ravenloft in that castle one, the Ravenloft Castle, where red names are not rewarding in the same way, and you just feel like you're wasting a lot of time, especially if you had a bunch of buffs running in order to increase levels, whatnot. Here, you know that you're going to get at least material, so doing those extra little chests makes sense. And that's this expansion in its essence. It's an excellent, really good, I think, itemization scheme. And I hope that they are going to continue building on it. But unfortunately, since they don't have as many named items now, because, before you had to have all this combination of set bonuses, so that required a bunch of different items of the same kind. Now they slimmed that down, but those don't really have the effects that really can replace some of the stuff that I already have. And that's a me thing, right? It might be perfect for one of your alts and one of your characters, and you might just find the one thing that you were looking for. The Isle of Dread type crafting system, now Lamortia, excellent. I really wish that they could build a little bit more on that to add a little bit more flexibility. Combined with the augment system as it fleshed out now, since Epic Giant Hold, excellent. And then finally, breaking up the set bonuses into your own a la carte way of doing set bonuses. I think that's all great. And the fact that you get materials from every encounter, awesome. So this is Isle of Dread Light in the sense that you have an excellent itemization scheme, but you don't really have the wilderness and necessarily all the quests that feels like you just want to run it over and over and over. But thank God that the quests are not super long and convoluted and as terrible as some of the Myth Draenor quests were, in that you feel like, you know what, I can do this. This is good. And every time I do this, it's going to be rewarding. You start running these over and over on a daily basis, the short ones, the long ones, and you will always have the material eventually to what you want to do. My hope is for the raid that it's going to fill out the rest, that you're going to get those blanks that allows you to do a little bit more with what you already have here, so it feels like at least with an alt, you can now have a full Lamortia setup instead, and can start taking advantage of those moon and sun augments. It is not bad. I think I'm going to make a video of all the different expansions, just roughly giving you an idea what I think. There's 10 expansions total. I'm not going to go into details necessarily, just what I generally would rate them as. And this will not be rated at the top. This will not be rated at the bottom. In fact, it has a perfect blend for what we expect an expansion to at least have. But I'm not really impressed, and it's not feel like I've really got the value of my money. I think that started dropping with Mists of Ravenloft. After that, there's been questionable if you're really getting the value from all that money. You know, Menace of the Underdark is hard to beat because that was just a tremendous amount of value. It really was. This one fits more towards the upper middle, maybe because of the fact that it builds on two good systems, crafting wise, at least, and scheme wise, except for none of the items truly really works for me right now. But that's, again, a problem with the fact that Isle of Dread was so good, so I really have the full Monty of the things that I want. But it's okay. And whether or not I say that it's worth the money, the hireling is good. Some of the features are good. I don't care about the cosmetic stuff or the mounts or anything like that. But I will say this. If they continue building on this crafting system and the moon and the sun augments, if they keep that similar theme, at least you will get a much better system out of it than a lot of the other stuff before. And that's, in the end, is pretty much why you play this game. No, don't get me wrong. Rating, social, whatever, that's fine. But do you also really want to find a new item that can continue allowing you to grind for the right reasons? So you have a good one. I hope your life is perfect. I hope everything goes your way. And then in the end, regardless what happens this year and next year, I hope everything works out perfectly fine for you. And as I always say, until we meet again, adieu.